Hey, y'all. Thanks for joining us today on the Veterinary Ledger podcast. We are excited today to be here with Cory Friedman. He is the managing director of the veterinary division of the Alera Group. So pretty much everything health, dental, vision, life insurance, everything that is not business insurance related, but pertains to you and your staff, and take care of all of those. Cory, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Megan. So happy to be here. My name is Cory Friedman. Although I answer to Cory Friedman, Cory Feldman, I've gotten them all. But I am the managing director of the veterinary division here at Alera Group. Alera is a large national insurance brokerage and benefits consulting firm, and I lead a team within Alera that is dedicated to supporting the veterinary community nationwide with respect to their group health, dental, vision, life, disability programs, essentially anything that falls under the employee benefits umbrella. The way I like to think about it is if it comes up in the conversations one might have around recruiting, or as I think about employee retention, chances are it's something that, we help manage and oversee.
All the super sexy stuff like taxes, right? Everybody loves.
Yeah, that's right.
How did you get into Batman specific? Like, how did that come up?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I wish I could say that it was intentional, but it certainly wasn't. In fact, even getting into the insurance industry wasn't totally intentional. So I'll give you the condensed version of my story. But I was a finance major in college. I went to Indiana University, graduated from the business school there. And as a finance major, there are two primary paths that, those who graduate go down. Either they go like the CPA or accounting route and end up working for one of the big four accounting firms out of school, right? The KPMGs, the, Ernst & Youngs, right? Whoever's of the world. Or they try to go down the investment banking path and oftentimes find their way to New York. I am from Chicago, born and raised, and always wanted to go back home and know a whole lot about investment banking or, private equity or finance, right? Broadly speaking at the time. And it was getting to be that point where we're getting close to graduation and I've got to start figuring out what I want to do. And at the time, family friends of mine, my parents' generation and grandparents' generation, ran an insurance agency in Chicago called GCG Financial. And so I approached Alan, who was the oldest of three brothers running the agency at the time. I said, Alan, we've known each other a long time. I'm a finance major in school. You're GCG Financial. It's in the name. Surely there's something there. I'd love to intern and see what you guys are all about. To which he said, we are what you think we are. We are an insurance agency and we don't really have interns, but there's a couple of guys here that might need some help, like stuffing envelopes or doing some, cold calling or mailings over the summer. And if they want to take you on, we won't pay you, but you're more than welcome to come hang out.
Free labor.
Sign me up.
Sign me up.
So I did that and fell in love with what we were doing, from a benefits perspective and just learning the industry. This is the kind of thing that until you need it, right, you don't really totally understand it, right? Health insurance or some of the other benefits. And as someone who was younger and entering the workforce, recognize that a lot of my peers, right, friends and others would have to make some of these same decisions for themselves, and really just love the idea of being younger in this industry and learning how to speak the language and make it, more easily digestible, right, for those who are having to make some of these, insurance enrollment or buying decisions for themselves for the first time. And I was invited to join the firm out of school at 21, and I did. And right about the same time, we were approached by the American Animal Hospital Association to help build a resource for their members. And at the time, what was born out of that partnership was essentially an insurance brokerage dedicated to supporting AHA's members around the country, powered by the resources of GCG Financial. And so the objective at the time, right, the assignment rather, was to go and get licensed in every state, learn everything we could about all the state rules and nuances, and, support what promised to be a high volume of, right, small businesses as they navigated the complexities around health insurance and offering benefits to their teams in a way that would require a lot of handholding and a lot of support. As right, those who manage, animal hospitals and who oversee the benefits programs rarely have any formal training in benefits or even HR. They don't have dedicated HR teams or benefits managers. And so they would really rely heavily on us to be an extension of their team. And for older, more established, advisors, brokers, agents inside of our firm running their practices, that was not a super exciting proposition.
Right.
And so it was very much a, hey, kid, you take this and go figure it out, right, type thing.
We've got energy still. Take
exactly.
it on.
You've got nothing else to do, plenty of time. And so I did. And there was another younger advisor named Brent Rosen who I was working with at the time, and the two of us, right, essentially decided together we could partner and we could build this thing and it would be meaningful. And we loved animals and we love the people that work in animal hospitals. And if we could help them, then there could be something really valuable there. And so we did. And so we built this practice in partnership with AHA and grew it and scaled it and started supporting, lots of animal hospitals around the country. And we built this playbook. And what we learned is that animal hospitals look very similar, right, demographically speaking, from one to the next in terms of headcount and gender makeup and age and income levels, right, and all of the things that play a factor in where we focus our efforts in designing benefit programs and understanding what works and what doesn't. And so as we build out this playbook and recognize that what works well for one should work well for others, we were able to lean into that and really grow our practice, but also help a lot of others just take control over a situation that they felt they had no control over, right? Rising healthcare costs and not understanding benefits and benefits not necessarily being aligned with the practice's objectives or what the employees want or needed, from their employer. And so we grew our practice from there. Fast forward a few years later, and we've got partnerships with the team at Veterinary Growth Partners and Vetcelerator and the VHMA and a number of others. And we work with everything from your smaller, independent practice owner with just a handful of support team members, or even those who are just starting out, right, building a practice for the first time, and support most of the larger, corporate owned practice groups as well that might have, dozens of or hundreds of locations and potentially thousands of employees and everything in between.
That's fantastic. I mean, we needed it, right? We all need the help. So what have you seen in just these couple past years? What's changed in the vet med health insurance game?
Yep. Really good question. So I would say, for a long time, right, the objective for most, right, the seemingly impossible, question to answer is how do we maintain or enhance our benefits, right, defined as the level of coverage, right? How do we make sure our employees can, see the doctors that they want to see if we're talking about this through the sort of healthcare, right, health insurance lens? How do we make sure that they can afford to use the plan, right? So are the copays low enough, right, for them to see doctors or fill prescriptions? How do we do that while also driving the cost of the plan down, right? Can we get the same or better benefits for less money, right? That's always the ask. And I would say that there's still a tremendous amount of, focus on solving that particular problem. I think, for most, right, in or adjacent to the industry, there's definitely a heightened sense of awareness about the mental health issues that are present, right, in the industry. And so people looking, to their advisors and looking to their benefits programs to help solve both the affordability, right, of mental health care challenge, but also the accessibility of mental health care challenge, right? So how do we solve for that? I would say there's been definitely a continued focus there. I think where there's been, somewhat of a renewed focus is, I think, for a long time, and I'm gonna paint with broad strokes here and speak generally, but for years there's been a lot of consolidation activity, right? Especially on like the GP side, right? And so I think not for everyone, but for some, there was certainly this sort of thought or sentiment that maybe our benefits program doesn't really matter, either because we could never possibly compete with the larger employers in the industry, so why try? Or it doesn't matter because we're going to sell our practice. And so, like, who cares, right? Like, why spend the time or the energy if we know that we're just going to transition to a larger, organization, and our employees will get integrated into, their workforce and then become eligible for their benefits. And what we've seen over the, I'll say last, couple of years, but certainly accelerating more so over the last year, is a slowing down of acquisitions. We are seeing in the consolidators that we support a smaller number of acquisitions. And also we are seeing a lot more new practices opening, right? A lot of veterinarians and maybe working associate vet in a practice that was acquired, and they've stayed around for a little while and then realized, right, practicing medicine in a corporate environment wasn't for them, and they wanted to go and do their own thing. And so where we're seeing a lot of sort of renewed focus, attention, energy, right now is in trying to level that playing field, right? People now are paying more attention to, trying to answer the question, okay, we're smaller, we're independent, we're committed to staying independent, either because we're just starting our own practice or the opportunity to sell our practice isn't there, right? Or it's materially changed in some way. So what do we need to now do to make sure that we are an employer of choice and we're out there looking for our next veterinarian or, next technician? that our benefits program is seen as meaningful and that, people understand that we're invested in their well-being and that we care for our team. So
I think it's huge, right? And everybody wants to do it. I know that all those small practice, all those one doctor practices want to offer as much as they can to their team. The question that we get over and over is how much do they pay for 40, 60, 50, 50, a $300 a month. Do you give guidance on that?
yeah, really good question. We do. And I think there's a couple of ways to get there. And I think it's also important, for anybody that's thinking about making that investment and trying to figure out what the right, cost share with employees or the right contribution structure is. It's important to know that you can change that, right? And what works today might not make sense a year from now. And so, for example, if you're just starting to practice and you're just bringing on your first cohort of employees and you've just invested in the build out of your practice and equipment and all these other things, and you're focused on building out your patient base, maybe now is not the right time, right, to be paying 80 or 90% of your employees' health insurance premiums.
Right.
Maybe it's better to start out a little bit later. And as you grow and as more revenue comes in and as your team, stabilizes, like maybe then you make, a greater investment in the future. And you as an individual, as an employer, always have, that flexibility. But what I would say is there are some norms, right? And there are some guidelines that we try to live within, because at the end of the day, if you are going to offer benefits, you want them to be competitive. And so it is important, right, that they are aiding in employee, attraction and retention, not a detractor, right, from that.
It doesn't count if I can't afford it, right?
Doesn't count if I can't afford it, right? So I would say, if you're a larger practice, I'll answer this in a couple of different ways. If you're a larger practice, and let's just for conversation's sake, define that as one that has more than 50 employees, and maybe you're subject to certain Affordable Care Act's, guidelines as a larger employer, we might use the Affordable Care Act's affordability safe harbors, right, as a reference point to say, okay, here's what, you have to do to be compliant, right, and back into what that looks like. And then sort of line that up against, but what does the industry norm look like, right? Is it more or less generous than what that number would be if we were just looking at the, compliance aspect? And then where on the spectrum do you want to be? For smaller employers who aren't subject to some of those same, right, affordability, standards, it's leaning more heavily into the veterinary benchmark. And then from there, making adjustments up or down, again, based on where they want to be on the spectrum. And also recognizing that as we look at the sort of total compensation or total rewards package, right, that, that someone's offered, benefits are a part of that, often a big, meaningful part of that, but just a part of that. And so you might find a practice that is paying a higher hourly wage, right, or a higher starting salary, or doing something else in another area, or maybe it makes sense to have a lower contribution to health insurance because it's being made up for, right, in other areas, or vice versa. So all of that has to be taken into consideration. All that to say, the average for the industry hovers right around 65, 70% of the employee-only premium, okay? And if you're offering more than one plan option, which many employers do, it's good to give employees choices.
Right.
And unlikely that if you look at, 10 people in a group, that all 10 have the same needs as it relates to healthcare. Most would then define that contribution as a percentage of the base plan or the lowest plan's premium. So maybe it's 65 to 70% of, the higher deductible, lower cost health insurance plan. And then if somebody wants to buy up or pay the difference to the more comprehensive or richer benefit plan, the individual employee can make that choice for themselves and pay the difference. What that typically looks like in terms of dollars is somewhere around, call it like $350 a month per person. Now, of course, there's some nuance there, right? Smaller practices that are subject to like age rating, health plan structures where younger people have a lower premium and, right, aging employees have a higher premium. That dollar amount may fluctuate, right? That's 60 or 70% of a, aging employee's rate is a much higher dollar amount than that of a, 27, 28-year-olds. And so there are some things you can do to try to smooth, that out. But as a general rule, that's the target. And then I would just say from there, if somebody really wants to be, right, like more generous, ratchet that up. If you're just starting out your practice and so cash flow is a concern and, like you want to start out smaller, recognizing it's always, easy to increase. It's really hard to decrease that contribution over time. Maybe that number starts at a $250 a month or $275 a month contribution, right? Okay, as long as it's thoughtful and there's a strategy behind it, we're not just guessing, right, and like throwing darts and just seeing what feels good, then I think it's okay. Rarely are we seeing people investing additional dollars in dependent contributions, right? So if I'll cover my spouse or my children, I'm able to do so, but at my expense, right? I have to pay, the incremental increase in premium as the participant. And so I think where there is an opportunity for some employers in the industry, especially those who maybe have more people working for them that are longer, right, tenured employees or have families, to invest some additional dollars in the family premiums could be a real differentiator for some.
I so appreciate that you actually gave me numbers, right? So many times we're like, I know you do this or you do that, and I don't actually. So I think that's very helpful, I think, to everyone who's listening. We're all waiting for that like magic number, right?
I appreciate you saying that. And I think it's a funny thing, right? But we have people come to us all the time and they say, hey, I want to offer health insurance to my team. And my initial response, right, sort of reflexive, is going to be, great. Like, what's the budget? And they're like, well, I don't know. And I'm like, well, what? Like, don't let the insurance policy premium inform the budget for health insurance.
Right.
Tell us what you, right, can afford to spend on health insurance, and we will go and design the best health insurance, right, or benefits program for your team within, right, those budget parameters. And so if you come to me as an employer and you say to me, hey, I want to offer health insurance and I have budgeted $600 a month per person, right, on my P&L, I'm going to tell you, right, candidly, it's too much. Like, you don't need to spend that much, right? Like, and I think that's great. Like, we can do a lot with that, and we'll show them ways, right, that they can walk that back. But the opposite is also true. When people come to me and they say, hey, like, we want to offer, a health insurance plan, we've budgeted $100 a month to contribute towards our employee premiums. Like, what can we do? And the answer is not a lot if you want to be competitive. And it's good to know that, right? And so just knowing that, like, the norm is somewhere like in that $300 to $350, right, $400 a month range is helpful, because it helps us help the practice owner or practice manager understand, like, if this is really viable. Like, if you've only really got $100 a month to spend on a per head basis for a health insurance plan, you're better off spending that money somewhere else and just not offering health insurance. Like, that is the honest truth.
Buy Band-Aids for the bathroom.
Exactly. Right. But if you say to me, I've got, $500-$600 a month, like, I'm also going to be the first to tell you, like, that's great, but, like, we actually probably don't need that much. And here's what we can do. And we can be really effective and offer something really meaningful without getting to a place where, like, health insurance is free for everybody. Because as great as that sounds, I also don't think that's the right approach either. Because I don't think you want people participating in a benefits program they otherwise wouldn't, right, or don't need, just because it's free. There can be some adverse consequences, right, there too. And it's just about finding the right balance.
No, that's smart, right? That was my number one question, is people ask, how much should I pay? What's the number one question that comes to you time and time again?
Yeah, that's a hard question to answer. I would say for sure, what should we be contributing, right? What are other people contributing? We get that question all the time. We get questions all the time around, can I contribute different things for different people in my practice? Right? And the answer there is maybe. Okay. And oftentimes, right, the distinction is, DBMs, right, or doctors versus all others. Like, that's a common question that we get. And I get it too, right? I do, just like practically speaking, right, from like from a business standpoint, I understand where the question is coming from and the logic behind it. What I will say is there are rules and limitations around discriminating in terms of health plan contributions in favor of quote unquote highly compensated employees relative to all others. And so, right, it's clear to see that, like, doing something different for your DBMs versus all others might fall into that category, but it's not a hard and fast no. There are non-discrimination tests that would need to be done. There are third parties that can do this. Payroll vendors, right, sometimes can do this. And, we certainly provide guidance on this, for our clients. So I would say it's possible, but with limitations. And then again, I think it just comes down to, like, what's a good fit culturally, right? And I think for so many people, just because we can do something,
Sure,
does that mean we should, right? And so I will always sort of flip that back, right, on the employer who's asking and say, okay, let's say we could do this. And then let's just say that all of your employees, right, full transparency, like, it was found out, like, everyone has access to the same health insurance plan, and your doctors, right, who are your higher earners, right, are getting their health plan paid for, or 90% of the premium paid for. And everybody else, your reception team, right, some of your technicians, some of your lower income earning team members, right, have access to the same benefit, but they're only getting 50 or 60% of the plan paid for. How's that going to go over?
It does hurt, right? When the lower ones, I'm getting minimum wage and paying 50%. Yeah, no, for sure.
So we try to encourage something more equitable where we can. But I understand where the question's coming from. Like, I get why it's being asked.
Yeah. It's just also expensive these days.
Yeah.
So if someone had lots of questions, where could they go, Cory, to find lots of answers?
Yeah. So I would say a good place to start is either just, directly with us, for example. So like visiting aleravet.com is our website, and you can click a button there that just sends an email right to me. We are very happy to spend time with anybody, just talking through some of these things, helping them understand options, exposing them to what's possible, right? Not here to just sell insurance. We very much are consultative and really just try to be helpful where we can. There are a lot of really good practice consultants out there that really understand, right, some of the ins and outs of offering benefits, having had exposure, to a lot of things, or having once managed a practice and been responsible for these things themselves. I would say some of the coaching teams at like Vet Accelerator or VGP are really good resources if someone's not participating in those organizations. The team at Granite Peak is really well versed, right, in a lot of this, and certainly can help somebody understand, if maybe their expense allocation to their health plan or benefits program looks like it might be outsized relative to others, right? And maybe needs to be addressed. It's always going to occupy, right, one of the top expenditures. But if that's, increasing by double digits year over year, and it's like significantly outpacing growth in wages and other things, like it's not hard to draw the conclusion that there might be an issue here. And so, while maybe that's not something that the team at Granite Peak or others right in a consulting capacity can solve, they can certainly help identify that there might be a challenge and set you on the right course and getting to the right person. I recently published a book on the topic, definitely we're very excited about, called Beyond the Exam Room, a veterinarian's guide to health insurance and employee benefits. That is available for sale on Amazon. Someone could reach out to us and we're happy to get them a copy as well. Wrote that book to really serve as a guide, as a playbook to address some of these things after, 15, 16 years of having the same conversation with hundreds, if not thousands of practice managers around the country. I finally woke up and said, maybe I should take all of these conversations that, we have and try to put this on paper somewhere in a way that someone could, read it and digest it and simplify it without, right, just, having to come to me to get this information, which might help make them a better practice manager, more informed, a better collaborator for their broker, better able to hold their broker accountable, right, for helping them sort of pull on, right, and identify all the right levers, or certainly, make them, better equipped to have that next conversation, with me or somebody like me. So there's a lot of really good resources out there, and we hope people will take advantage for sure.
I mean, you literally wrote the book on it.
I wrote the book. Yeah.
It's a great resource. I will say here's our shameless plug, is that we are starting our payroll platform, rolling it out Q3, Q4, and you thankfully are going to be a part of that as well. So benefits package along with the payroll package and HR and all the other things that are headaches. So we're excited to team up for that.
Yeah, we are too.
My last, this might be a difficult one, but thinking back on your time, insurance is so important, right? And people are like, oh my gosh, I'm glad you saved me from this or you helped me with that. Is there like a moment where you're like, I did this, I helped this person's leg surgery, or, some sort of aha moment that warms your heart?
Yes, no, there is. And it's funny that you asked this question because as I was writing the book, I was thinking about, how do we sort of humanize, right, what we do? It's so abstract, it's so intangible, or it's just like, oh, everybody hates health insurance and, right, the insurance companies are the bad guys. And certainly, right, there's, been a lot in the media recently about, right, some of the, larger insurance companies and, some of the things that have been taking place, whether, right, right or wrong. Certainly the interpretation is that, it's sort of this like us, right, versus them, this tug and pull, and people see it very much as a need to have, but not something, right, that people love, right?
Yeah, I don't want to be spending my money on this.
Right. And, again, insurance is a funny thing, right? Because insurance products in general, right, are things that we buy that we hope we never need to use, right? Best case scenario, I hope I'm throwing away money on my insurance policy, right? Think about my homeowner's policy or whatever it is, right? But health insurance is so different because we touch it, right? We live it all the time, right? It is the how, right? It is the primary way that we pay for access to healthcare in this country. And because of that, the difference between having it and not having it can be really meaningful. And so I call attention to this and I share this story in the book. But there was a practice in Chicago, so local to where I am, that we helped introduce an employee benefits program and a health insurance plan specifically. This is a few years ago, but shortly after that plan was put in place, I got an email from the practice owner who was sharing this anecdote with me. And the story was that they had an employee that had been suffering from chronic headaches for a while. and it got to the point where like they had, missed a couple of shifts, right? They were taking time off of work. It was becoming somewhat debilitating, but they didn't have health insurance, couldn't afford it on their own. The practice didn't offer it. And so they were just sort of suffering through it, like so many people do.
Sure.
And we offered health insurance, and that individual was able to sign up for a plan that they were now able to afford because of a meaningful employer contribution to that plan. And they then used that plan and went to see a doctor. And it turns out the reason why they were suffering from chronic headaches is they had a brain tumor. And they were able to catch it, and they were able to, properly diagnose and treat it. And this person credits their employer with saving their life.
And you, right? And you.
Yeah. And that is why we do this, right, at the end of the day. And that's, the lens that we look through, like in everything that we are recommending and how we're consulting and what we're advising on and the solutions that we're bringing, to the table and, what we're exposing people to. It is very much to try to figure out how to invest the dollars, right, that have been set aside for a benefits program to improve the lives of, the practice's employees and their well-being, whether that's health insurance focused on, right, providing, access to healthcare and better health outcomes, whether that's disability insurance and protecting them, right, from loss of income in the event of, right, an illness or an injury, or just having a baby and simply being out of work for, 6 or 8 weeks, all of these things that really matter. And why that's so meaningful, right, aside from the obvious, right, is that employer in a highly competitive, right, environment, especially for veterinarians and technicians, being credited with saving this employee's life. That employee is not going anywhere else.
Right.
Right. Like that becomes really sticky. And that wasn't the reason why we did it, of course. But as a byproduct, right, if done the right way, that's a win for everybody.
I love it. I got goosebumps. Okay, so thank you for being here today. I appreciate you sharing all of your knowledge. If people want to find you and save the lives of their employees, right? Ultimately that's what we're doing. How can they find you?
Yeah, so I would start with Alera Vet, so ALERAVET.com, and just, click the schedule a consult or, contact us now button. That comes directly to me, or feel free just to reach out directly, either LinkedIn, where we provide a ton of content as well, links to podcast episodes. We host a podcast as well called Inside Employee Benefits, really focused on benefits for veterinarians, lots of newsletter content, etc. So LinkedIn's great, or just email me directly at Cory, Cory.Friedman, Friedman, at aleragroup.com. I feel like my kids can recite that. They've heard me leave so many voicemails or messages that they all know, like my cell phone number and my email address at 6 and 4. It's occupational hazard, but yeah, Cory, Cory.Friedman, Friedman, Alera, Alera Group.com.
Perfect. Well, I appreciate your time today. Look forward for all of our paths to cross in the future.
Likewise, we're super excited about what's happening with VetPay HCM. I think solving a major void in the market for so many practices that have been, either trying to navigate, right, the complexities of payroll and all of that on their own, QuickBooks, or are stuck in this like transactional, loop where they're not getting a ton of support or guidance from some of the larger, big box payroll companies. You know who you are, I won't name names, but I think having someone that just really understands the business dynamics and, what a practice manager or owner needs and can provide just a more supportive, right, payroll solution is super helpful, and where we can plug in and collaborate and help from the benefit side of things, we're happy to do it. And we're excited to get started.
Okay. It'll be great. Good partnership. I'm excited.